Probably like 4 to 6, maybe. I don't know. I've
And
yeah.
we're live, just so everyone's aware.
Nice.
So,
Yeah.
Cool.
uh, today we have Devon Turnbull, OJAS. I always want to pronounce it OJAS for some reason because of
Yeah,
the
it's very commonly pronounced OJAS, but the origin of the word is it's a Sanskrit word that is pronounced with a hard J.
hard J. OJAS. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Okay. And then Justin from Ampsandsound, and my lovely co-host Jay, the wonderful vinyl collector and extraordinaire man. So, anyways, we have Devon here. We're gonna have just a chill chat about audio. So, I'll let Devon want to kind of do a quick intro, and then we'll dive right into the first little bits of it.
Sure, and I would love. I know it maybe is repetitive for some of your frequent viewers, but I think it'd be great to just do a little round table intro because
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to know more about you guys than I do
Yeah, for sure.
on a basic level. But yeah, so my name is Devon. I operate a small. I mean, actually, it's always hard to introduce myself. I have something kind of between like an art studio, art practice, and a small audio component manufacturing business. I have a small team. We operate most of the time more like an art studio, more like a lot of friends of mine who, they're painters, sculptors, that have a small group of producers and assistants that are making work. But we also make DIY market type products as much as we can, hoping to do more. And my background is kind of equally in um, uh, formal education in audio engineering via college, a long background in fashion, art, and design, and I think maybe most importantly, DIY audio. Um, and those things have all kind of like converged into whatever it is I'm doing now, which I'm sure we will talk more about, and maybe you guys can help me figure out what it is.
Yeah, be cool. All right. Well, thank you,
Oh,
Devon.
by the way, I'm in Brooklyn, New York, if anybody's wondering where the hell this guy is.
It's very, very cool.
With a
Uh,
huge subwoofer behind him that
Yeah.
it's like
I
it's
was
like having a missile silo like sitting right behind you. Like no one mind the missile. How big is it?
It's about 700 liters, the cabinet, and it is 31 and a half inch diameter
oof.
cone.
It's like a fireplace hearth.
I
Yeah, well,
was,
there's actually a fireplace hearth behind it, and
that's cool.
it was intentionally made the exact same width as the fireplace hearth that it is it? Yeah, it's exactly the same width as the fireplace hearth. I probably could have gone the extra mile and made it like, a little bit more integrated, but when I built this thing, it was the first. I've built quite a few of these now, but this one was the first, and I really did not. I knew it was going to be hard to get it up here, but it was like, I mean, I think legitimately terrifying getting it up here, and so it's not going anywhere. It's not getting replaced.
It's kind of like I got a pair of corn scallas from Justin, and they came in on this huge pallet. And my wife was out, I think, on run errands, and so I like hustled and got them, like manhandled these massive like speakers, big horn speakers, and got them into the living room. And she got home, and I joked, and she was like, "What are those? Why are those in the living room?" And I was like, "Well, if you can move them, honey, they can go."
Oh
Common
man.
experience, like I mean, the first pair of speakers that I made was a very small two-way Altec based thing. This is about, I don't know, this is more than 15 years ago. And I mean, they were tiny by my standards today. But when I brought them home, my wife was just like, no way. And I was like, I have this sneaky move. Well, it's not such a sneaky move as much as it is just like, it's like a good litmus test. It's like, this thing has to prove its value.
Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes your partner will have this conception of how you're going to use the space in your living room. I've done it also with espresso machines, where like ridiculously huge commercial machine comes to the house, and it takes up a third. My first espresso machine took up a third of our kitchen counter. And I did eventually get rid of it, but she immediately went into like coffee shock. Like, what happened? We have to drink bad coffee now? Like, this sucks.
Espresso and audio. Those are two dangerously expensive.
Yeah. Then you get into the
pens
and
then you get into
back-breaking,
knives, etc.
back-breaking weight and huge messes potentially if you're dealing with vintage stuff.
Oh yeah. And then I'll go to Justin, and then we'll go. I'll say for the intros. So Justin, I want to do a quick intro, and then we'll go Jay, and then myself.
Sure. So my name's Justin Weber. Most people on the interwebs would know me as an audiophile and longtime hobbyist and owner of Ampsandsound. And Ampsandsound, for the last 10 years has been really focused on personal audio and, tube amps to support personal audio. But I've always been a builder of DIY and horn-loaded speakers and two-channel. But, probably about 15 years ago, the horn-loaded world sort of kind of took a pause. There was less interest, from my perspective at least, in horn-loaded speakers from people, like big horn-loaded speakers at least, and the amps that powered them. So it was a nice transition point for me to go into personal audio. But what I do most of the time, 50 to 60 hours a week, is actually I'm a psychiatric social worker.
Okay.
So I help people with mental health needs who have severe mental health illness or addiction issues. So that's, Ampsandsound is my refuge from my pressures of my work life. And though pretty darn successful, I treat it like I treat it still with the idea that it's a hobby. So I get to look at it not from, and I think probably the same way Devon sort of explained that, you look at it like an art project, and it's not dollars and cents driven. It's either purpose or desire driven. Because the only people you have to answer to is sort of yourself and the people who might consume it.
Yeah.
Since that's a smaller audience.
Thanks for the work you do in all fields.
Thank you.
And I think we're so lucky to have this, this craft, this refuge, because it's just like a giant, super fun jigsaw puzzle that you can really never stop adding pieces to.
True. Very true.
Right on. Well, I'll go jump in. Jay Parafina. I might find me on IG as Jay's_vinyl_collection. Outside of that, I also go by the handle Snake Oil 415. Been going by that for quite some time. Find me on Reddit, Headphone, and all things like that. I'm just a very, very passionate hobbyist. I love doing DIY stuff. Right now, my obsession is making cables. I just love that path of, those are expensive and they're time consuming. So I just love going in there and, it's my zen. Also, like, my perspective, why I got really into, the community. I think audiophiles has this negative connotation at times, and it's also like this inaccessible hobby at times. I don't think it should be that way. For me, it's just, I want to influence this to become a more inclusive space of, especially like marginalized communities and more representation. So it's something that, Tyler and I talk about quite a bit, and working on content and think pieces around that has been my focus for 2023, because music's freaking cool and everyone listens to it. And I think there's just a little bit of a intimidation factor to this hobby that I really want to demystify. That's like, my goal and what I really want to be able to do. I'm a obnoxiously proud Bay Area resident and have been for most of my life. Spent last 10 years in SF. Recently relocated with my wife over here to Oakland, which I've been digging. East Bay love for sure. But yeah, that's me. Oh yeah, outside of being a hobbyist and spending all my hard-earned cash on records, I'm a product manager. I build software in a space that I care deeply about. Kind of some parallels to what Justin is doing. I'm in the healthcare space. What the company I work at, what we do is help enable folks that are ACA customers. So basically Obamacare folks that wouldn't be able to have access to healthcare. We make that easier for them. So something I'm very passionate about is healthcare is a human right. So we need to make that accessible. I'm gonna go pass it off to my, passing off to Tyler, the man, the myth, the legend.
Wait, on a lighter note though, have you reinforced your floor? I mean, Devon probably knows the math on this better than I do, but like, what's 4,000 records away?
Oh no, it's a lot.
Yeah,
those floor joists might be.
I don't know, but when I moved, it was not fun. And basically, I had everything moved by movers except for my gear and my records. No one was going to touch that.
Thanks for nothing.
Yeah. But I think I spent a good day just boxing everything up and making sure that I didn't ruin the organization of everything, because that is, very important to me, and making sure that they were packed securely.
Alphabetical, I hope, or did you go genre?
So I go genre and alphabetical, and then there are some others that are autobiographical. And what I mean by that, there is a section that is like near and dear to me that I will never part with, and I hope one day I have some children that will inherit them and not sell them for an eighth of their value, and will use them to summon me into their living room. That's what my dream is, because I hang out at a lot of record stores, and whenever I see someone come in there with like this is my grandfather's collection, they passed away, I'm like, you can summon grandpa back. Why are you selling those? So maybe a little bit too romantic about that, but every record you own, you bought for a reason. And there's a story behind each one. That's what, makes them special to me. Also, my CD collection and tape collection. I diversify, that's most of my net value.
Vinyl.
I do know a couple of people who have reinforced their floors.
Yeah, I do too.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Homie Stretch Armstrong, he's got a place he's building out not too far from me here in Brooklyn. And his entire top floor of his brownstone is just going to be his record collection. And he will definitely be doing some heavy steel reinforcement in that floor, because, a whole floor, if you occupy a whole floor of a normal house with shelves and records, I don't think you'll even really have like a listening space up there, just the record collection,
Oh, wow.
Normal house cannot support that kind of weight.
It's bananas.
Nice thing is records can also be used for, tuning a room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
True.
The audio, it's like you have some audio plants in there and you're gold.
Yeah, audio plants. Gotta have hi-fi plants.
Hi-fi plants.
Door stops.
Awesome.
Door stops too.
Yeah, man, those things are awesome. I love those things. I'm probably the least interesting of the group here.
Lies.
So basically my background is I'm retired government, so I did military for so many years, and then I did search and rescue and ran the Coast Guard's command center as a civilian for the Puget Sound here in Seattle area. So I'm in the Seattle area, Pacific Northwest, and ran their search and rescue, all missions, pollution, anything like that, anything regarding the Coast Guard. I was helping coordinate and or running search and rescue missions or other missions. Retired from that because my daughter was born, and no one wants to be on a night shift and can't go see their daughter if there's an emergency, So left that world and went into private sector for a bit, and then left that world, and now I mostly just do photography, and I do this because it's fun talking to more interesting people than myself. So, but yeah, my main passion is definitely photography, and then my escape is audio. So I love, put on some good music and then, escaping into it and, relaxing to good music. So that's kind of generally how I kind of came into this space.
You guys all seem to be pretty passionate about headphones. Is this a shared interest with the review?
Yes. And I think my first passion was speakers, but then when my daughter was born, I couldn't have speakers, and so I pivoted to headphones, and that just kind of went down that rabbit hole. And now she's older, so I'm starting to pivot back to the speaker world, and that was with the Corn Scalas from Justin, and then I have a pair of Kef Metas for my desktop monitors. I don't know about, and I know Justin's a heavy speaker guy, so.
Yeah, my wife she doesn't know how to poison me yet. She's not that not that resourceful. She's not that mean. But I've built speakers that I should never have had any right to build. Like I got given the plans for like Jubilee bass bins and decided to build some Jube bass bins. Which Devon, I'm sure like they're 4 feet by 5 feet for just the bass bin. Mm-hmm. There's no I have like a 14 by 14 room. That a pair of those don't belong in that room.
I mean that same thing is what drove me to like take on commissioned work to an extent in the first place, was just a desire to build and have fun with like speakers that are way too big to even, physically fit into the spaces that I have. When I got into audio, I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment on the Upper East Side. I think like a lot of people too, like audio was a major motivator for me to get to give myself a situation where I can afford to have more space dedicated to audio. I mean, I don't have like a site specific, ground up construction listening room or anything like that. But, you sacrifice certain things to have more space as a creative person, as a family person, whatever it is. And audio was definitely a big motivator for me to just like have more space, but also then like look to other people's spaces to start building things of like a larger scale.
Cool. I was reading about
I think
that.
I think the amps for me get to be my expression point because, thank goodness my amps go into Pelican cases, and I have a warehouse, and I can put them away and come back to them, and they can be heavy and big in relative terms. But the speakers were just so, if they don't, the commissioned work is such an interesting idea because if I'm sure it allows you to have your fullest expression, because then, although you're balancing other people's considerations, maybe space isn't the primary consideration anymore. Physical space being the primary consideration.
Yeah, I mean, working with clients is always like, it's always there are always like certain sacrifices you have to make, and I think one of the things culturally that makes for a space with so many misfits, like in audio there are a lot of like basically misfits, and it comes off in a lot of different ways, but a lot of the guys that I end up working with and developing like meaningful lasting relationships with are just like characters, to say the least. And this is true, I think, of a lot of the sort of like subcultures that have delved into like headfirst in throughout my career, whether it's like artists, street artists, you know, just like really kind of countercultural. Like you hit a point where you become kind of countercultural and you attract a lot of like interesting personalities. Um, and you know, we are passionate about making things that reflect our perspective on music listening. And that's always something that's pretty specific, right? Like I like listening to a certain kind of music on a certain kind of equipment. And that's going to be something that's different for everyone. And I think one of the things that leads to this like experience that turns a lot of people off from hi-fi is when the person that you're seeking help from starts like talking down to you about the way you listen to music or the music you listen
100%.
to, or the
Yep.
equipment that you're interested in listening to that
It's
music
the
on.
worst.
Yep.
And it's like it's a thing that like naturally occurs, and I understand why, but it you know, it turned me off as a young audiophile.
Same.
Yep.
And so you know, I try really hard to never do that. You know, I don't want to tell people like I certainly have a responsibility to tell people what if they're asking for something that won't do what they want it to do, that's not going to be the best tool for the job they want to do. But at the same time, you know, not like you need to softly guide people into making decisions that you think are the right decisions. Not like, you know, throw someone out of your listening room because they, you know, like a genre of music that you don't like.
100%. I think that's one of the like aspects of this hobby that I think needs to be like debunked, right? Is this concept that it's only like, you know, vocal jazz that sounds great in these systems, or you know, Josh Groban is like what you need to hear. And my whole piece is this, you know, I have a lot of folks that want to get into this hobby, and they always ask me like, hey, what's a good test track? What's a good test track? What should I be
Whatever you
listening
listen to the most.
What do you listen to the most? Like, what are your favorite songs? Because, you know, you can get really good gear. Like, I do believe that there's no such thing as a genre agnostic system. And it's kind of like why I really love headphones and the fact that I was living in an apartment, a 1-bedroom apartment for years in San Francisco. And right now I live in a, you know, small 2x1 house, right? I can't keep around, you know, 5 different pairs of speakers. But, you know, at that same time, it's like, pick the system that's going to be, you know, guide. That's why I try to guide folks is like to something that's going to cater to what they love, whether it's hip hop, EDM, you know, jazz, you name it. You know, Taylor Swift, you can help build that. You know, you can build something that's going to get them closer to that music. And to me, that's what the gear is all about. Is it bringing you closer to the music? Is it making you feel more, build a deeper emotional connection with that music? And that can be an aesthetic thing as well.
Yeah.
You know, it's something that's more beautiful that just makes you want to stay up.
Use it and grab it. And
Yeah,
hold it,
totally.
Or even just be able to look at it while you're listening. Like, it's just such a nice thing too, you know?
Well,
Yeah.
one of the things that I have had to learn, I mean, I've learned in the last 10, 15 years more and more is that, you know, gear is turned off a lot of time. And if it is turned off and not being used, it is functional sculpture.
Mm-hmm.
It represents an idea or an aspiration or an emotion to a person, and they're buying or consuming that idea, aspiration, or emotion. And I used to be like function, and I'm giving more and more energy to trying to balance that idea out to the best of my abilities within like sort of my own design profile and language, because I recognize that, you know, people look at it and it means something to them even when they're not using it. It emotes something to them when it's off.
Yeah,
Because it's a sculpture.
I was talking to a friend yesterday who's a high-end dealer, and you know, he was talking about how he has a lot of clients, you know, billionaire level clients that he builds these super high-end systems for, and you know, they'll have like a $50,000 lighting fixture, like an $80,000 rug. And sometimes they balk at the idea of like $20,000 speakers, even though they have a $50,000 rug. And a lot of that comes back to like what you're saying is like if their perception is I'm just paying for a level of quality. A lot of people also have this self-doubt about like, I don't know if I can tell the difference.
Yep.
So I can only justify spending X amount of dollars. It's going to get me to like where I need to be. Um, and and they're not looking at it as like functional art, which is really what it is. You know, I mean, it's certainly more functional than like the lighting fixture, but they don't think about it as decorative art the same way they think of the lighting fixture as decorative art. And they can go to Christie's and they can look at like, you know, modern lighting auction and just say, oh, someone else paid $80,000 for this like designer light. You know, that I can justify. But this guy trying to sell me some $30,000 speakers, like, well, why don't I just go get, you know, the thing that I have had or whatever. Yeah, I mean, I think perception of this stuff as art, I mean, that's always been for me, like, I think that's how I arrived at where I am, is I've always seen audio as like at least like a folk art field, you know, similar to quilt making or but obviously has a incredibly deep level of engineering and understanding and problem solving that you don't have. You know, I'm lucky enough to show my work in art galleries, right? And sometimes I'll, like last summer, man, I went through like, you know, weeks of like really intense work leading up to the show, but then like a couple weeks of incredibly high level of stress to just like, are all of these handmade components that I'm making specifically for this thing going to work by such and such a time on such and such a date? And I'm looking at some of the other art in the show, just thinking like, I must be so stupid for choosing this art form, because like that thing just has to look good.
Yep.
This thing has to not just work, but it has to sound good.
Yeah. And look aesthetically pleasing as well, like to some degree, right?
Yeah, that like is a constant through like pretty much any, like, well, that's not true. A lot of conceptual art like isn't, but it has to look the way the artist wants it to look. But then the level of complexity in like a tube circuit is so much more than like, you know, sometimes functional artwork, people are really impressed when there's like, I don't know, like some very basic function like a clock or
Yeah. I mean, also, it's like, you know, when you're designing something, right, it gets harder and harder to design anything when you have multiple goals. When you have like this goal of it being functionally and audible, and then you also have this goal of it being aesthetically pleasing and unique, and there's just trade-offs that you're going to have to make. And it's I mean, I think about that when I'm building software all the time, right? You know, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Everything you build is allocating resources, allocating time, and it may, you know, compromise another aspect of whatever you're designing for and building for. And it's just really, you know, going back into that focus, like I always ask that question, who is this for, and what do they, like, you know, what problem are they trying to solve with this? And, you know, just thinking about that, you know, looking at some of the pieces that you've worked on, it's like, there's going to be like, it must be very difficult to kind of hit both of those goals, right? The engineering aspect of it and then the creative art aspect of it, not just making it look good, but also making it look unique. Like, this needs to be different than what's out there. I can't just replicate what everyone else is doing.
Thank you.
Well, so guys, I was going to kind of steer us back to sort of our agenda, but I was going to bring up something. So hopefully we could talk about some things that are exciting to all of us as sort of a next discussion point. But one of the things I wanted to bring up that I have observed about Devon's work when I looked at it more carefully is that I've seen lots of examples in recent work from you, Devon, and yet I can tell that the same design language, I think, is being used across so much of what you've done recently. You know, like I can't really cite looking at mostly the audio, your audio work, but all of it shares that same design language, and I now recognize the difficulty of that, being able to look at different projects and still see the same voice, you know, and in general the same level of execution, you know. So even if things get executed in one place, I see it propagate somewhere else, and that like all the boats rise. And if you look at all the boats, they all look as though they're built by the same boathouse, you know, the same boat maker. You know, that's
Yeah,
a harder proposition than I ever understood it to be.
for sure. Yeah, I mean, you have to have like a, well, I mean, I feel like I'm also constantly balancing having like a visual identity that's consistent throughout all of my work, and a sonic signature that all the stuff kind of sounds like it belongs in the same brand, if you will.
Yep.
And then like aesthetically, um, a lot of that is like exercising restraint when it comes to
Yep.
to design, because my work from a very early, like if you go back to stuff I made 15 years ago, it looks very similar to the stuff that I made. I had a really clear vision for what I wanted the aesthetic to look like,
Yep.
and kind of just constantly during that time, especially when you work with like other like makers or fabricators that maybe don't understand the context of your work historically in the contemporary, you know, marketplace, art world, whatever it is, they'll be like, well, why don't you make it nicer? You know, like you can fancy this thing up. Like I got 10 ways to fancy this thing up. And you know, I can't say that I haven't at times been like, oh shit, like should I make this like nicer and not be true to like the way I want it to look? Like, do I need to, because you know, this stuff winds up costing a lot of money. There's no way for me to make it not expensive. I mean, and a lot of people also don't understand that that is not an intentional position that I've taken. You know, I make my stuff as affordable as I can. I mean, if anything, like I lose money on projects like all the time. But it's like going to wind up costing a lot of money, and then you just say like, well, who am I making this for? I mean, first and foremost, I'm making this for myself. Like I just don't know how to make anything else. Like sure, sometimes I have like someone that is a little bit of a muse, like, oh, this guy, you know, I really like his either his aesthetic, his sensibility, and I want to kind of like make something that I think he would want. But for the most part, that's because those guys, like I respect their perspective, and you know, you're just drawing inspiration from that person. But yeah, for the most part, I'm making what I want to make, and I just kind of hope that there's that other people are interested in it. And I will say that like I was doing this in isolation for a really long time. You know, I mean, there's a lot of interest in my work right now for sure. And you know, people that don't understand how far back this goes with me will I mean, there's, I think sometimes surprised that I've been doing this for like 20 years, but it's also that like, that I was doing this and people within my peer group really weren't that interested in it. And I don't really like fit into, I don't think I was ever going to be successful just going to like Rocky Mountain Audio Fest
Yep.
up and kind of going head to head and competing with like um, all these other brands, and also people who have like a really long standing relationship with like that community specifically. I just know that like that's not my lifelong. As much as possible, establish meaningful relationships with those people who I perceive as being my elders, and I try to learn as much as possible from them. But I know that that's like not, I'm an outsider in that world, basically, you
Yep.
know, I think for a long time I was just afraid to put myself out there because I was afraid of getting like laughed off the stage. Like,
Yeah, it's a real
this is
thing.
not as relevant as it was maybe 10 years ago, but I was afraid of like, who's this hipster? Get this guy
Yeah.
out of here. Like just look at, I mean, and you see that sometimes in forums, like look at this
Oh, yeah.
guy.
They're
How
the
how
worst,
can
man.
he possibly, how could this guy know how to make a speaker?
Oh,
And I don't even know what that means. And sometimes it's like, sometimes there are undertones that I'm just really uncomfortable with, especially, having worked with Virgil, having initially made my, I've gotten a lot of my initial attention, especially through the DIY, the art bookshelf speaker, Virgil kind of like promoting that along with me, and him kind of representing like a new paradigm of like Black creatives at the very top of the, fashion, high design. And I would find like DIY audio forums, like someone would post a picture of Virgil and be like, you're gonna buy a speaker from this guy? And I would just be like,
Why not?
why not?
yeah.
What's
What about this picture signifies to you that he doesn't know what music should
Yeah.
sound like?
Yeah, that's
Well,
ridiculous.
Well, so
You know-
Devin, just to interject for a second, one of the things that I hope to sort of bring comment to was, so Jeremiah, which is a friend of Devin and I's, said something to me that I thought was an interesting idea, which was like, no one told people that they could build their own furniture till IKEA told us that we could, right? I'm paraphrasing it terribly, but it was sort of that you can have ownership of your process, and there are people who will help you take ownership of the process and make things feel demystified and accessible. And in the art house speaker, I think that you gave a touch point to people who, I think most of your customers are very high, have very high taste levels personally, right? So these are not, though the audiophile community at large, not at large, I'm not trying to be divisive. Many people in the audiophile community misunderstand the consumer of the art house speaker and don't understand that these are people of very high taste levels that are educated. They're just not white and buying typical audiophile products, perhaps, right?
Yep.
But the other part of it that I thought that Jeremiah said that I really believe is that if you build it, you own it. Like you own the idea, you own the process. And there's a specialness, the connection, right? There's a specialness to that I think is really interesting. And maybe you wanted to, if you wouldn't mind just sort of sharing your thoughts on it, because I see it as like you built a speaker that's big enough for people who are perhaps like city, loft livers, dwellers, people who have, that space is different than the suburban household, perhaps. They don't look like everybody else, and they have different demands and desires. And they still, though, have the right to have really interesting, good experiences, and they got to own the experience by building it. That ownership idea, I think, is a really important one.
Yeah, I mean, having really just that one kind of like product, one kit, one project that I have nurtured over the last few years. Well, first of all, I had no idea how many people would be interested in it. When I had the idea to do a kit, well, I wanted to do a kit for a long time because it's frustrating to me that like my peers often can't afford stuff that I build. I can't justify the amount of time and money that goes into a project to oftentimes sell that work to a close friend or peer who for a price they can afford. So, I've wanted to find a way to make my work more accessible for a long time. And like I said, if it weren't for DIY audio as a hobby, I wouldn't exist, and so also just kind of promoting DIY audio as a hobby has always been something that I wanted to make, and I still want to make a bigger and bigger priority. And get people into not just like making their own speakers, but kind of segueing people into like kind of extreme, this sort of like perspective on hi-fi that I have, which is a pretty extreme one, right? Like larger scale, more serious. I'll talk a little bit more maybe later about like how some ideas that I have for doing that. But it was like early pandemic. I was sitting on the stoop in front of my house, and it was just like, we're just a few weeks in, and we're all trying to figure out like what the fuck happens now, like, and people are like, I myself was like, I got some sourdough starter, and I was like,
Let's start baking.
I was doing the thing, I was like, I was just trying to cope. I was like, man, hold on, I have this like, this is my dream to be able to like nurture my hobbies and just like be, go in on the things that I love crafting, and I should promote that. And I literally sat on my stoop and was like, I'm just gonna kind of put it out there on Instagram. My following was, I don't remember how big at the time, but it was a lot smaller than it is now. I think I probably had somewhere in the area of like, I don't know, 10 or 12,000 followers, whereas I have more like close to 60,000 now. And enough people though that like you'd get a response, so I just posted like a long text post. Like in my head I was like, I wonder if I could get like 5 or 10 people that would want to like do a speaker making workshop with me, and we could do like this, like a multi-way Zoom, and we could just hang out and like build a speaker together. And that was the closest thing I'd ever had to like a viral response, putting something out on social media. I had like, I think that day I got like 350 comments on this post that was just like, like sign me up, I want in, like let me at it. And I was just like, okay, there's like something to this. So then I spent a month or two like figuring out what the product was, and then sold enough of it that I then had to spend like several months just producing, packing, and shipping these orders. But one thing that
I wonder, can I interject for half a second?
Sure.
Did you get costing right the first time?
No, I lost money for sure. I lost significant money the first round of that we did.
To be expected, right?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, the prices are out there on this stuff, so I don't mind talking about it at all. But I kind of like initially just saw it as being like a one-off thing, and I was like, I just basically was trying to break even on it, and I charged, I think, like $1,400 for a pair of cabinet kits, all the hardware, and even we had worked out that we were going to use this joinery system that you, Justin, have used, the Cabaneo to do all the joinery, and that like it would really be like more work than putting together an IKEA thing, but anyone who can put together an IKEA thing can build this like real professional quality speaker, or high, I would consider a high-end speaker. And
you used incredibly good wood. That wood is expensive and heavy.
Yeah, this is the wood that we use is like what most people aren't making speakers out of these days because it's gotten too expensive. Baltic birch, high density Baltic birch. And the kit is heavy. The cabinet kit weighs like 50 pounds, not including the drivers. So we ship you 2 massive things that weigh like 30 and 50 pounds. And yeah, I definitely lost significant money on the first round of shipping all those things, and learned a lot, and also learned that like this was something that I wanted to keep doing. So I had to adjust the price, and we charge around $2,000 for the thing that I was trying to charge $1,200 for in the first place. And of course, some people were like, hey, what gives, man? This thing just got like way more expensive. And I was like, yeah, I'm not going to pay for you to partake in this. But one thing that to your original point, Justin, which is like people's sense of ownership of this thing, that they're essentially, are they a consumer or are they like a participant in this thing?
Participant.
and the fact that like it has kind of propagated this like Instagram following that I have now, a lot of that is that there's this term that I had never heard of before at the time, but I've learned is user generated content, right? Like I don't really put very much, like I don't do very much Instagram. You know, if you look back at like how many posts I've done, I'm pretty infrequent at posting, like doing hard posts. I do maybe one a month at most, I would say, on average. But every day there's like multiple things where people are like proud of what they've done with particularly the speaker kits. And they have this thing of like, I don't think there are very many products where like, you know, I don't watch a movie TV and then just like once a week post like, I just watched a movie on my Sony TV. This thing rules. But when people spent days solving potential problems they encountered, and then I mean, I think you guys have all some level of like DIY experience. Like the first time, it's a really magical process. The first time you go from like the first time you go from like raw materials, a stack of like in most cases, you just got some plywood. You just got some 4x8 sheets of plywood. You've got like some insulation. You've got some wire. And even more so if you understand like how your driver works, right? That you've just basically got like this coil of wire and a magnet and some paper and a frame and a metal frame. And you know, you can't help but like in the process of like sometimes spending like weeks working on the thing, just questioning like, is this thing even gonna work?
Yep.
First time for sure, you're like,
turn on, you're like,
yeah, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it doesn't the first time, but that again makes it only that much more satisfying when it does.
Yep.
And when you know, you can kind of trust that like this is a proven model that people seem to like this thing, so I will too. You have the confidence to like put that time in. And then yeah, I mean, I have like a lot of you know, customers who just like once a week are like, man, I'm just appreciating having this thing right now. And that gives me the opportunity to have like a big presence on social media, but all I'm really doing is hitting repost. It's a pretty
you did
that's community. That's what that is.
2 or 3 weeks ago. You
Community,
did. I mean, like, if I could just highlight 2 examples for me, like I remember there's a person that did like one that was wallpapered, and it was like this super cool wallpaper that they wallpapered the whole speaker.
He actually makes that wallpaper too.
Okay, that was like, I thought that was super, super, super cool. There was another examples of like street art graffiti that was done that was super, super cool, you know. And then like I think it was like, was it Jeremy Lin who has like he has his stereo is put on cinder blocks, and rather than buying a rack, his entire stereo's on cinder blocks, and he's got the art house speakers on this like wire.
That was my direction too. I mean, and I've actually I have a plinth that I made for him, and I haven't finished putting. He bought a bunch of stuff. Like he bought the speaker kit, he built the speakers, and he was just like, I am like in. And he's a really great curator. He has an amazing eye for like various things, like furniture, art objects, this and that. But he was just like, what do I do now? I've got the speakers, like, you know. And I think he had bought that little like, you know, super simple tripath amp that I was making at the time. And he's like, I'm listening to music, it's great, but I want to like go way farther with this. Like, what do I put it on? And I think I was just like, you know what I love is just like a cinder block base for audio components. Like if you want something which is just, you want to go put something together, go to Home Depot, get a bunch of cinder blocks. Because in a lot of these MJ listening room pieces, like you see very frequently like an amp that just has like a couple cinder blocks under it, and the amp sits on top of the cinder block, just looking for like, you know, mass loading their amp or whatever it is. And he did a beautiful job with it. He got those like mini cinder blocks, and he set them up in this really geometric way, and then I kind of put him on to Uesugi Bros, and he bought a bunch of used Uesugi Bros. He bought, I think, he bought two power amps and a preamp, all Uesugi Bros from some seller in Japan that I helped him find. Um,
His meditation chair, though, was my takeaway. So, like, back to sort of like reconceptualizing what it means to be an audiophile. If you guys could look through Devon's Instagram, you'll see this like wonderful apartment, cinder block audiophile stand. But then there's like, and there's videos of him building the speakers being put together. But then there's this meditation chair, and I'm like sitting here going, I mean, I don't know if I could sit in it. I'd like to think I could, but that was like A, good design, and B, like completely different than my understanding. It's not like where I would listen to music or how I would listen to music. And it was like, and this is why this is why the world at large is different than I understand it to be.
Well, I mean, also that speaks to like how personal this hobby is, right? Yeah. And why DIY can be like super cool is the sense that I'm, not only am I part of the process, but I'm building it to like my liking, right? And just setting up your room as an expression of yourself for like what you want and need out of that room.
If you want to, oh shit. So the thing is, this guy Jeremy, this now friend, originally customer of mine, I was gonna give him a shout out and tell people how to find him, but his Instagram is Jeremy, Jeremya Chin, Chin, but he deletes all his posts, so he has nothing right now on his profile. But give him a follow, and he lately pretty much only posts about his like hi-fi and the way he uses it. He had a ton of content on there, but he just deleted it all for whatever. A lot of the kids these days, they delete all their posts. I don't know, it's a
thing.
I'm not there yet, but a lot of my younger friends, yeah, they delete everything that they post.
It's the Goldman Sachs background check clearing.
Yep.
So let's see if that will populate.
Oh, there we go.
That's him, yeah.
Wait, it wasn't in focus, Tyler.
There you go.
Jeremy.
Should be.
All right.
Yep.
Yeah. It's all one word, Jeremy A. Chin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think if you follow him, you'll start to see what Justin's talking about. And
well, it reminds me, like I went to a studio in Paris like long ago, like 30 years ago, and like how they were listening to music in this apartment in Paris was so different than how people in Southern California were listening to music.
Mm-hmm.
And like how the room was set up and what speakers and amps were chosen and for what reasons. Yeah. I always say, that like sonic profiles or sonic preferences are culturally specific to my thinking, and whether you say subculturally specific or not, so like what we think of it as an American sound or American music equates to American gear set up in American ways is not what might be done in Europe, in different places in Europe or different places in Asia or East Asia or Latin America. Well, there's an audio show that happens in Mexico City, and I really, 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 really desperately want to go to this audio show in Mexico City because, I have a few customers that live in Mexico, and it's super interesting to see their homes and how they organize their systems, and I really I enjoy seeing the world perspective because it's so different than mine.
Yeah, I mean that's right. Why we have things like British Hi-Fi, or what I always have found interesting and have always wanted to visit, is Japan, the Kisses, right? And I know that's becoming kind of a trend over here in the U.S. to try to open. There's one here, Bar Shiru in Oakland, which is trying to capture that vibe. But just like, for me diving in and reading it, it's, you go into these spots, it's very different than the American experience. When you go into a place to listen to music, you're supposed to be quiet. It's about like being, to just listen to the music. And there was this, I just love that idea, because that to me is why I would want to go to a place like that. I'm not into the whole, I like dance, but the whole dance kind of club scene has just never been for me. But the idea of going to, and also the history behind the jazz keys as to how they came about is just really fascinating, of being able to appreciate this music that was coming in from the West that they didn't have access to. So it was a way for someone that couldn't buy it or couldn't get access to it to be able to experience it. And it was this respect of knowing that collectively, that's why we're here. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Devon, are you still doing your translation work on the?
I haven't had time to do it for a good while. Let's see. I mean, listening room.
So if you want to tell them what I was talking about, Devon, because they may not know.
Yeah, you have a huge collection.
Yeah, so I have imported. So a lot of the times I get criticized from like people with this American perspective, or American European, usually pretty similar perspective on audio, that they have like certain preconceptions about like what a listening room should look like and what size speaker is appropriate for a room and how to set up a room, and a lot of them have been taught a certain way of doing things for like decades. And so of course they're like attached to that, and they see the way I approach building a listening space, and it just seems like ludicrous to them. But a lot of my my inspiration came from, like, I was working in Japan and I had a lot of exposure to the Japanese hi-fi scene. The Kisas to an extent, but the home hi-fi scene there is even much more extreme and interesting to me. So, I have some relationships with people over there, audiophiles and makers and people that I've met and have traded things with over the years, parts and whatever else. And then I also have a pretty large collection of like
that's
these are
reading
all
up on that.
issues
Really
of
cool.
issues of MJ, and that's not like my whole collection, but that's a bunch of them.
Wow.
And those go back, right? All the way back to like way back, like, right?
MJ has been monthly magazine since the late 1920s.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Wow.
And that's just a crazy, it sort of started from what I've been able to learn. It sort of started as like ham radio, like the same way in the US. Like, there was a time, I think probably in the 40s and 50s, when like ham radio and like just loud speaking telephones were like synonymous. Like, you weren't into audio if you weren't into like radio, because that's what people listened to primarily. So kind of like, also there was the post-war generation in Japan, and it was also a time of like incredible economic growth there. And I mean, we all, we're all like close enough to the same age. Like, I grew up in like the Nintendo generation, right? We're like, holy shit, like Nintendo, like Japan, these guys like are like geniuses. They're like making these video game systems. They dream up this crazy shit in Super Mario Brothers, eating mushrooms and growing and stuff.
Oh, this will show, but like that's
it's like it's like these incredible like otaku cultures, basically, right? Like that like this concept that in Japan it's like really cool to be a nerd, and they celebrate like these things that aren't as celebrated here. And I think it has led to like a really fertile creative world there in certain really special things, especially where like technology and creativity like meet.
Combine.
And so like this jazz kissa kind of phenomenon of jazz bands not being able to like make it to Japan, and so people collecting really rare records, and people like going to a place
Yep.
to hear like a record collection because they were never going to hear it anywhere else. And then the sound system, the record collection became really the primary thing people were going there for. And then there was also coffee and, whatever.
Everything else. If the
Just
food would be amazing.
Yeah. But the home audio scene is bonkers. And that's really what's chronicled in like these sort of like audio. They call them like audio technology periodicals, basically, right?
You mean like the guy that hung his own power transformer on the pole because he wanted clean
He
power?
ran his own power.
Yeah.
The
So, like,
retired lawyer.
this
Yeah.
is kind of like the main magazine that I collect, and it's like they refer to it as audio technology, but like this is just a random, I don't know, 2001 August, but like every issue has like they have a section in the beginning called Vacuum Tube Museum.
Oh,
That's
wow.
cool.
And
That's
so
rad.
the first few pages, and this is true of like I have issues that span 4 or 5 decades, and
Wow.
this is true of virtually every. And then the second, basically like spread, will be the listening room. So like I've never
that's
even
so
really
cool.
I've never even really seen this one, but like it's nice. This guy has a pair of 604s, Altec 604s, and like what looks like a 612 cabinet.
Wait. So everybody, as an example, 604s, 612 cabinet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there you go.
And then Devon's is right there.
Our house right there.
Mini 604.
And Devon, and just to let everybody know, because Devon and I had a conversation about this, you had said that the art house is sort of meant to be the inspirational progenitor, a touch point to the 604 and the 6.
I mean, I think that like the discovery of this, like the way I arrived at this driver is it's a good story in terms of like, what do I do? Like how do how do I make the decisions that I make? And it's not true of everything that I do. Some of the stuff that we make is more of the way people traditionally design speakers, right? Like you've got like the audio speaker database, you're looking for a driver that does a certain thing, has certain mechanical and electrical properties for to accomplish the job that you need to accomplish. You want to build a certain kind of cabinet to reproduce a certain frequency range, and you're going to find a driver that's suitable for that. That's like the less inspired way, in my opinion, of like designing a speaker. Now, not to put that down, because that's how virtually everyone designs speakers professionally.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's also not to say that like the way I arrived at that speaker is not like more amateur, because you could certainly say that it is, but you could also say it's just more organic. So, basically, I used to frequent this shop in Akihabara. Akihabara in Tokyo is like called Electronics Town.
Yeah, electronics.
So like on the subway, like you'll see when you're anywhere near Akihabara, kind of like if you see like in New York and it's like Times Square that way, they'll have like 5 stops away to be like Electronics Town that way. And that is like traditionally the audio hub of like all of Japan, basically. It's where there are still some great places, but when I started going there 15 or more years ago, there were 10 times more parts shops and vintage shops, and it's almost nothing now, which is really, really sad.
Yeah.
But there's still this place called Tokyo Radio Department, and it's like a 2-level, like tiny stalls. It's the old school Japan. It's just really small now. But there's a vendor who only sells like amp building parts. He's cool. Just like he's got like a 5-foot wide booth he sits in. Most of these guys now are like very old, so the good chance they're going to be asleep when you want to ask them a question. And he's just got like bins of resistors, capacitors. Usually there's like one transformer guy, a couple guys that only sell enclosures, a couple guys that sell, or a bunch of tube vendors, and like you specialize in something. So like this guy has a lot of potentiometers. This guy has a lot of, coupling caps or whatever.
Yeah.
But I used to frequent this place that doesn't exist anymore, which is extremely sad to me. It was called Hino Audio. Hino, like the truck company, Hino Audio. And they had this on this one street in Akihabara, kind of like an off the beaten path street. I don't even remember how I originally found it. They had like 5 or 6 different storefronts on this one street, and they were big compared to a lot of the other audio like vendors in Akihabara. And they were like each one, they were all Hino something, so like Hino vintage, and then in that they'd have like full scale like Altec A5 speakers, just like in the corner together. There's a price on them, and then there was one that was just like vintage turntable parts. So like a whole like wall of Garage 301, 401s, and then like tone arms, etc. And then there was one that was just DIY speaker stuff. And I learned a lot there, and then the basement level below. So like they just had their kind of curation of parts. So crossover parts, drivers, whatever. I remember, yeah, everything from like EJ Jordan to some vintage Altec small drivers that they had some inventory of, and in the basement they had this listening room, like a audition room for like the stuff, mostly the stuff that they sold upstairs and some other like completed speakers. And they were listening to this 12-inch coax that I was like, this is a nice sounding speaker. Like, what is this? It's not a Tannoy, it's not a JBL. I'm kind of familiar with like the normal DIY market coaxials. And, they told me this is a JBL coax, but it's not available to like the speaker building market. It's marketed only to like the construction industry and like the audio integration industry. And it's marketed as an in-ceiling speaker.
Oh, wow.
Which of course, like many of the great vintage drivers were all like the 755A, which is one of the most fetishized full range speakers of all time. That's exactly what it was made for by Altec back in the day. And they were offering like a cabinet. It wasn't a cabinet. Yeah, I guess maybe it was a kit. They had a cabinet that you could buy, and they were kind of doing like what I do with the art bookshelf speaker on the 12-inch version of it. Is called that line of speakers is called Contract Control, and that was the 322C, which is a 12-inch coaxial. And I was like, I'm impressed. Cool. Like I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna check it out. So I came home, and first of all, I had a really hard time buying the driver. Like you can't just order it, generally speaking. They only kind of sell it to like their installer contractor like network. So I had to kind of like backdoor one. I found a website. I actually ordered it from a couple websites, and they did not fulfill the order. They were like, JBL wants to know how you're using this product.
Oh, wow.
They're not just going to sell it to you. And I was like, well, I want to build a speaker. And they were like, that's not what this is for. Sorry, we can't sell it to you.
Wow.
Eventually, like B&H website would just like sell it. It's expensive. But I bought a pair of them and I started experimenting with them. And I built a bunch of them over the years. It was never like something that I really like. It wasn't something that I used it became something that was useful for like it was an ends to means. Like if I had a client that wanted that scale of speaker that does that, I would use that driver as a nice 12-inch coaxial driver. But then years later, I'm making all these enormous speakers with Alnico magnets and handmade reproductions of the Altec drivers made by Bill at GPA, and the stuff is expensive. It's super heavy, and I realized like there are also a lot of like commercial projects that I do where I just need a smaller speaker. Like I need what functionally the whole world uses. I kind of knew, given my perspective, I wanted an 8-inch full range coaxial. so I auditioned like all of the, Bema, Vital Pro, Eminence, like whatever. I auditioned a lot of them, and I had a couple that I was like, they're okay. They work. Like if I need to use this thing, I can, but I'm not gonna like sit at home and listen to this. Just being totally honest. And that's always when I know like I'm not going in the right direction. Like this isn't something that I
What would
really like.
I use is bigger
What
than
would I use? And I was frustrated because I felt like I needed a solution for this. I needed something that did what these things do, but none of them were like really, I wasn't really connecting with any of them. I didn't feel passionate about any of these options that I had. Um, and and I thought like I'm pretty sure that there's an 8-inch version of that JBL contract control. And I'm gonna try it. So like I got some, and like it was just like I immediately knew, like the first time I put it in a box and started listening to it, I was like, oh, this is my sound. Like this has got this sonic signature that it sounds like it belongs. Like you talk about, it looks like it belongs in the body of work that I'm producing. It also sounds like it belongs in the body of work that I'm producing. It's musical. I like listening to it. Like, and it gave me goosebumps the first time I listened to it. And so I'm like, okay, I'm sold. And that was what I wound up developing into this art bookshelf speaker. But of course, like, you have this like self-doubt that creeps up on you from time to time, and you're like, I think it's really good. Like other people have told me it's really good, but you want some like, you want someone to like, you want some validation. This thing.
Sure.
And so I have this Instagram account called Listening Room.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Uh, listening_room_.
I can add it to the. I have a bunch of links for you down in the description of the video. So if anybody's wanted to look, if you go to the link for Justin or Devon's Instagram, you can then click on hit that, and I think it's in your profile. You can
have it in my
click on
profile as well. Yeah. So this is like, I think also in the this like growing interest in like jazz kisses. I kind of knew that I had access to like this stuff that to me is, to be totally honest, much more interesting than like the jazz kisses. Like these, like the jazz kisses are great, and I think I'm not, but this is like the manic shit that like makes me feel good about myself because I know I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
Right. This is like thousands of guys like me with my same perspective on, like, this is where I draw my inspiration from, right? And like I just want to share this with the world. So I started this account, and I'll basically like digitize the photos, just directly use like the and this is something that I've actually kind of brought into my art practice, is like the whole identity of this segment that they do every month in this magazine, and just kind of expose people to like this really extreme scene. And I translate the copy, and then in MJ there's also tons of other like, so like, all right, well look, the cover of this is like a Sony, I don't know, SICD player or something. CD player, yeah. And so like this is something that could appear on the cover of, I don't know if this would cover, I don't know if this would be on Stereophile, but it could certainly be on like
tech magazine or like a
tech magazine or whatever. But then in Japan, there's not this thing with like, let's just say a lot of these are like, okay, this could certainly be on the cover of Audiophile, Onkyo CD player, okay? But then like in Stereophile would never have like, let me take a look. I'm sure there will definitely be an example in here. I mean, so like, all these products they review, like, and they review them in great depth. So this is actually about a bunch of different products, but like, everything they break it open. They don't just talk about like, they don't just talk about like, oh, this is like
they go into the build quality, the actual deep dive.
They don't just talk about like, oh, this thing is like a Bordeaux, or like this thing sounds like a valley of daisies or whatever. This is like a really in-depth technical description of like how the thing works, the way it works. But then the other thing that's really interesting to me about the Japanese scene versus like the American scene is like, well, a lot of these products would appear in an issue of Stereophile, and then they have like also a lot of just audio engineering stuff, like room analysis and like measurement of speaker components, but like very technical measurement of speaker components.
That's cool.
For the DIY market, Yuichi Arai, who Justin, you probably know Yuichi Arai, right? Yuichi horns.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All those Yuichi horn articles came from issues of MJ. So like this is a Yuichi horn, and like there are
with the
plans
Kipple analysis.
There are plans for how to make all these horns, but then like this would never be in Stereophile, and then
well, it's
not
sort of
only
an interesting. Devin, it's sort of an interesting combination. So it's like if you took like
not
Audio
only
Express.
Yeah, all the
Yes.
detail and the schematics, like everything, like deep.
Well, this is intended. This thing is not for sale. This is a step-by-step instructions on how to make this thing.
That's crazy. That's
including chassis punches and in-depth circuit description. And it is like a journal of audio technology. But the thing that's really cool to me and inspiring about the Japanese audio scene is like they don't say like, oh, you're into tubes, you must be nostalgic.
I just into music.
You're just you also really like audio gear. Like and you're interested in very high quality audio gear, and you're not like, they don't prescribe to like you're a solid state person, you're a tube person. You're like the two can't agree that the other ones have any validity to the way that they're approaching, the way they're system building.
Yeah, they're all the same. They're just using different means to get to the end result.
Yeah, and oftentimes using both means.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I do it all the time. Anytime I have a solid state, I'll throw a tube pre in front of it just to give it that extra little bit of flavor and uniqueness. Real quick, though, I want to touch on something. I think, and Justin and Jay might be able to get more on this too. But a big thing with that, and I've noticed, is like you have these massive speakers, and I have the Corn Scalas downstairs, and they're large, and same thing, big horns, big woofers.
They're the smallest horn speaker. Like they're relatively small.
They are really, but the thing is, you'd think you'd need stupid amounts of power to power these things. And I'm using right now with Justin sent me over this his Kinsey, and it's got speaker taps for it, and it's this, how many is it, 1 to 2? 1 watt, and I'm powering these with their what's
they need to be efficient.
Yeah, and it's just crazy, and they sound fantastic for what 1 watt, and these massive speakers. I mean, my wife could easily get inside of one and have plenty of room to move around. So I mean, if there was nothing inside it, if obviously, but that's, I mean, so
that kind of like paradoxical relationship where people say that all the time. They're like, oh man, I don't know, it's a kind of a frustrating thing that like people refer to speakers as like watts.
Yeah.
Like, how many watts are those speakers? And they think that that's a metric that like indicates like how loud the speaker gets. Or I mean, it can to an extent, but they see this big speaker, they think big speaker equals big amp. Mm-hmm. And then they see big amp and they think big amp means big power. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I remember reading like early on somewhere, someone discovering kind of like this sect of audio and being like, oh, I was just so seduced by the fact that this like 80-pound amp only produced 3 watts of power, but that 3 watts of power had been like so labored over. Mm-hmm. And then I mean the efficiency, like the fact that like bigger speaker generally means more efficiency that's a fun thing to explain to people, because it's like it's surprising to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. They're like,
it's like, using physics.
Using physics, exactly.
Well, like my Kef Metas are, these little tiny things, like the actual, size of the speaker itself, like the actual driver is like, was that it's 5 to 6 inches, and then they take 45 watts minimum is well, depending on how you set it up, but
Yeah.
like, and then you go downstairs to my, these giant like speakers, and I'm sitting there with this little 2 amp and it's cranking, and it sounds fantastic. So I mean,
I just realized that I forgot the point of like a long story that I was
yeah,
telling,
sorry,
which was
I just
in the
interrupted.
process. No, I just remembered, and I didn't want to. So in the process of creating this account of like, so I'll digitize the images and then I'll translate the copy as, roughly, like
Mm-hmm.
mostly Google Translate kind of stuff. And in doing that, I spend a lot of time with these publications. And another one of the fun things is like in the back where all the ads are is really fun. There are like pages and pages of like, kind of classified ads.
Oh,
And a
okay.
lot of them are like,
Look at those
like
horns.
this is just, yeah. So like, I mean, everything from like drivers to like, this guy, I'm just looking at pictures, but there's like
Yeah,
oscilloscopes and tube sockets and like Alps pots, um, complete like speaker systems,
that's
vintage
cool.
stuff. And I started finding these Hino audio ads from like the late 90s. And I was like, oh man, there's the 328C, the 8-inch coaxial driver that I use in the art bookshelf speaker. I was, for months, I was, promoting this driver that I'd found and building speakers around it and selling it to people. And for months, not realizing that also Hino Audio had at one time been selling speakers around the same driver. And then I found an ad where they had a picture of the 328C, and in Japanese it said Mini 604. Like, and that was like really great to me because obviously the Altec 604 is like next to Tannoy, the most iconic coaxial speaker ever made, and has like a bigger, next to maybe, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
definitely the biggest following of any American
Mm-hmm.
coaxial driver ever made. And I did feel like there's like this strange relationship between, and the relationship between JBL and Alltech is like a well-known, I know it's almost one story.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yes, like very, very like satisfying to find. And also I have some other magazines that are not ads, but just like an issue of like 8-inch driver shootout reviews where they compare like 10 or 20 different 8-inch full range drivers to each other, everything from the 755A to like a current production Tannoy, and they include the 328C and reviewed it like super favorably for like a lot of different uses. And yeah, I mean, it's like finding those kind of like cultural connections into like a world that isn't inspirational to you.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of why I said like this is a very non-technical way of like discovering something that you want to build into like your product line essentially.
That's cool.
It's a really organic way. And I think that's why I said it's a kind of a good story because it's like it's one that like I went on this like kind of solo side mission and wound up
Right back.
regrouping with what inspired me in the first place.
It's circular. Yeah.
Well, I'll give you guys sort of a compare and contrast about two different ideas, sort of to dovetail into Devon's, like the art house. So, you know, Matasound, which is a great resource for DIY speaker folks, has sold like these Fostex backloaded horn kits for a long time, and they're really wonderful kits. Um, if you can get them, that's sometimes the difficulty of it all. But the Fostex don't like, I mean, and maybe Devin would comment on this, but like the Fostex don't like to be pushed very hard. When they get pushed hard, they misbehave. Whereas the JBL doesn't mind, I would choose to use no more than 5 watts with it and be really happy. So any of my amps, you know, between 1 watt and 5 watts, and keeping it single ended is going to, give me sort of the sonic signature that I'm going to want personally. Because I want it to whisper to me, whisper with the fullness of voice, right? But when I look at like what's a person entering the hobby to do, the Fostex kit is a great choice because they could build it, and it seems super accessible, and I've done it myself. Except for you get a sort of a tower looking speaker that is, I think, sort of harder to live with, and you get a driver that doesn't like to be punished as hard. Not that I intend to punish anything, but I will say, like, I thought that Devon's choice with the JBL was a smarter one, because the JBL certainly can take a lot more abuse if it needed to.
Hey, real quick, I don't want to interrupt, but I think Jay needs to get back to his day job. So I'm gonna, Dre, real quick. I just want to, and you can just jump off, brother. But one last question for Devon or Justin before you bounce, or
or a segue, or last thoughts for you before you conclude.
I was gonna double tap back on something you said earlier, Devon, is having a design ethos, I think, is extremely important. Something that you're focused and committed to versus trying to jump into like various trends. I think a lot of the companies that I really appreciate and products that I love that are built have something that they're committed to and aren't easily swayed. I think one company I really appreciate is Grado. They get a lot of flack, built in Brooklyn. They get a lot of flack for some of their design, but they're building something, and they've said it many times. We like it, and if you like it too, great. If not, that's okay. There's other products to,
there's other paths to go.
Yeah, and also like just kind of thinking a little bit about what you said, and going to like Rocky Mountain, and folks kind of like like, why would you buy from this, or like, this isn't part of that's what this hobby needs.
It should be. It needs to be more.
And I appreciate like, that's one thing is like, when I was talking to Justin about you and digging into what you've done, like, this is pushing it to other groups of folks that may not be hip to this, may not be able to feel welcome into like the Rocky Mountain Expona scene, right? And this is how this thing continues and grows. So like mad ups to what you're doing and committing really to like what you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Really cool.
It's very meaningful. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is, it's like, as an outsider, like I was saying earlier, where like even I don't really feel like I belong at those in those places. I think that people recognize that, like, I guess I represent like a different perspective that maybe is meaningful to them. I'd like to, and I not that I don't have converts from like the traditional audio world. I want to win as many of those guys over too, as many of those people over as well. But yeah, I mean, like, I think that one thing that's quite interesting is, like, I was talking to Guttenberg yesterday, and he's a big Klipsch fan and kind of came to the world of horns from a long history with electrostatic speakers, and obviously just box speakers as well, being a member of like the audio press at large. And he was talking about how, like, my whole perspective of like horn speakers is so countercultural within like the high-end audio world. Like in America, really, like nothing other than a box speaker has like been able to become a major part of the conversation in like stereophile, for example, right? And I think the thing that's really exciting to me is, like, from my perspective, because I live in my world, which I felt like there's been so much growth in the last couple of years, it doesn't feel countercultural to me anymore at all. Like, it certainly did when I started. I knew when I got into like large scale, high efficiency horn loaded speakers and flea power tube amps that was not what I was going to find if I went to Stereo Exchange here in New York, But at this point, it starts to not feel like underground anymore, because, at least I know I'm not like, it's not that big of a deal, but like, it's been enough growth from my perspective that I'm like, oh, I don't feel like I'm speaking to like the underground anymore. Like
Yep.
I'm certainly, I think that like within a certain world of like popular culture and like youth culture to an extent, and like the art and design world, I mean, I think that a lot of people are like I can't sell a speaker without a horn.
Yep.
People are like, you know, well, okay, great, I like it, but can I get a horn on it? And I'm like, oh, but it doesn't need a horn. They're like, I don't care, I want a horn. Give me that horn.
Well,
Um,
if I could just sort of interject for a second, Devin, it's an interesting thing. Like I'm known for putting speaker binding posts on almost all of my personal audio amps because I wanted like an amp to stay with the person and transition through their stage of light. And I came about horn loaded speakers because you could do modern power efficiency
yeah,
and horn loaded speakers and still get good sound at reasonable prices. You know, if you kept it under 20 watts, you most people could find, you know, a lot of dividends. Um, and I'm certainly like, you know, I'm going back to building bigger power amps because there's an audience for that too. But like, I have somebody flying in from another country to hear my single-ended amps. Like I didn't know what he wanted to hear, truthfully, but he's flying in for an audition, and I thought he was wanting to hear, you know, very source accurate push-pull designs that I have. And in listening to him and hearing what he really wanted and then hearing what he was searching when he found me, it was like, no, 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 no. I want to hear your single-ended things. I was like, oh. And, you know, he has big horn loaded speakers and he may even change what big horn loaded speakers he has. He's not committed to the ones he has, but you know, but he is committed to the idea of staying single-ended, low power, high texture. And I would not have
have a
Later,
good
brother.
day.
Chat later, bro.
that paradigm where, because the traditional two-channel market has always been, in my mind at least, push pull 60 watts and up, almost always, you know, and the hobbyist market has always been 20 watts and down, you know, by and large. But to be contacted by customers now that are saying, no, 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 we know who you are, and we want that single-ended texture because we want to go horns, is a nice conversion point or pivot point to hear.
Yeah.
It's not as frequent, but it's nice that it's happening.
Yeah. And well, I mean, you know, I think that like going back to like my conversation with Steve, it's like kind of exciting where I feel like a little bit like I'm at that point where like the underground genre is starting to like break through and become, you know, sort of like the first punk record or the first rap record that like that was like up there with album of the year. You know what I mean? Like, not to say that I'm like gonna win you know, stereophile speaker of the year, but there's like a convergence of like an powerful underground movement and like a mainstream interest, and that's like super exciting to me.
Convergence, where they two meet, kind of thing.
In terms of the you were talking about like the like a Fostex full range driver versus you know, I mean, I knew early on, I've never been able to fall in love with a full range, like a true full range driver. They just they don't do enough of everything for me. You know, I know it's controversial because I don't, I've had some 755s, Altec 755s, never fell in love with it, never held on to them forever. I've built a lot of Fostex based stuff, um, some Mark Audio drivers.
Del Paris.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give you a fun
DJ
example.
Jordan, you know, I feel like I need something that has a little bit more they're lacking in energy for me. Like I need something that's a little bit more just wider bandwidth and also like can be pushed harder. And so
Well,
I
I'll
kind
give you
of
an
knew
example.
the coaxial thing was going to work for me.
For
we
sure.
build
If I could,
full-on PA systems around those speakers too. You know, I mean, we're now like pairing them with subs and doing like you can throw a party with them. And I tend to gravitate to like pro audio stuff in general, like a certain kind of pro audio stuff, and then appropriate, tweak it, make it work for
Mhm.
hi-fi. And that is true to this as well.
That's cool.
Well, I was going to interject, like, so two fun examples I've tried to work with that were sort of in that 8-inch full range or 8-inch coaxial versus full range. So like Audio Nirvana is a wonderful company, and you know they took apart what was the company they took apart? They took apart, it wasn't a Tenoi. They took apart a driver, sent it to China, had it modified, and the Audio Nirvana full range is a fantastically good full range driver, um, but its suspension is so stiff that like its break-in period is so extensive before you can get it to behave normatively. You know, like more than 1,000 hours of break-in before that suspension is behaving predictably. You know,
Mhm.
and that's a hard sell. You know, because it how it behaves on hour one versus hour 1,000 is so dramatically different. You know,
Mhm.
um, and you know that's always such a difficulty. And then like another fun example that I've used, like the Radian 8 inches super coaxial is super amazing, but that crossover that Radian, the way Radian integrates their crossover is really difficult to sort of take apart and try to produce a speaker out of. Radian wants to sell you a solution, but they don't want to sell
Right.
you a component.
I, I spent a lot of time with that setup prior to finding the JBL 328C. And it was definitely something I considered because it's like in the right, it does a lot of stuff right. And is is relatively close to the solution I ended up with.
I think that the solution you ended up with though is infinitely more modular. And you know, one of the things that makes it, I was having a conversation with my friend Dylan, who's an engineer at an audio company, like a very large, well-known audio company, and he was frustrated with a speaker that he had and the crossover that was inside the speaker because there was like some potted inductor capacitors that had gone bad on this crossover, and
Hmm.
the manufacturer wouldn't disclose the crossover to this person who's like an engineer, like full on real engineer. And the lack of transparency was the thing that really rubbed him the wrong way.
Yeah, transparency is really important to me, as you can probably tell, right? Like, I if given the option, I will like never rebrand something and keep its source a secret. It's gotten to the point where it can be kind of a problem for me. Like the 328C is a good example. Like there's now like a whole market for the 328C. Like a lot of people are building their own speakers around the 328C. And you know, that was just not the case when I started building for it.
Was unheard of to find.
It was
But
it
what
took me like a long time to find any other references to it. And so, you know, sometimes some of the parts that I use, I will create a run on that part now. Like my thing has grown to the point where, yeah, I've it's been a problem for me sometimes where like I'll, you know, disclose the source for a part, and then, you know, I don't know, I think some of these people don't even know what to do with the part, and all of a
Just buying
sudden
it
like
all up.
it's hard for me to find this part now. um
Well, I just meant though that like the fact is like the JBL solution versus like let's say the Radian. The Radian, just so you know, Tyler,
Mhm.
like the Radian has an interesting, complicated crossover, but it has like the capacitor glued to the back of the driver in a way that's like quirky,
Impossible to.
where you can't really service it. Where the 328 is like a modular crossover
You can actually do
with
repairs of
like
your own kind of thing.
with right, and so for like Devon's choice, and it was actually really um, wise in that it allowed people to have ownership and transparency to the process, because it it being such a modular product in and of itself allows for longevity to it.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine in 20 years that these won't be repairable speakers, because every component is discrete and easy to get to and can be serviced.
That's cool.
For sure. Plus, I love products like this, but JBL's been making that driver for, I don't know, I think at least like 30 years. Uninterrupted production of that particular
That's
unit.
Cool. Tried and true.
Yeah, and yeah, so you just hope that the thing parts remain easy to get. I've actually never had to like recone one. I don't know if you can buy recone kits for them. I assume JBL is probably like just swap out the driver. But you can certainly get replacement diaphragms for the compression driver, tweeter / compression driver, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, I mean, they're fully serviceable.
That's cool. It's very, very cool. I had to kind of switch over because we're running up on 2 hours here soon, so I wanted to kind of switch over to another topic real quick. And I was thinking, I don't know if you guys, what do you want? We had a couple, we totally went off the rails of what we intended to talk about a little bit, but that's usually the case with this kind of conversation. It's more dynamic and fun and see where it goes and how it, I find that more interesting. But there's some really cool questions that Justin and Jay had that they wanted to ask about, and I think it's kind of relevant. It's what does it mean to be an audiophile to some degree. I think that was one of the questions that I found kind of interesting, and one of the things that comes from that is, and we've already kind of touched on it throughout this conversation, is there's different aspects of each hobby, right? And this is every hobby. There's the people that are focused on one aspect of it, and then and so forth and such. And so, like for some people in the audiophile world, at least in my experience in diving in the rabbit hole of both headphones and some of the speaker stuff, is that there's people that chase the gear, there's people that chase the music, and there's some people that chase just purely the sound, right? And so, what's your thoughts on that? Like how does and then then I always joke that then there's everybody else that they don't follow those three. There's everybody else, just they're there because it looks good, it's beautiful, and it sounds good, and they're happy. But then you have the extremes of these other groups.
I mean, I don't like to, as much as possible, I like to avoid like telling someone that they're not doing something
Mm-hmm.
if they think they are. And I would say they are. For me personally, like when did I mean, I think certainly listening to music has to be important.
That's forefront.
Yeah. I think that like listening is the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That whatever you're doing, whatever you've got to do to put you in a mental space for just listening.
Mm-hmm.
That music is not background noise for you. It's not like something to have on while you're doing something else.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that that's a pretty good prerequisite, is that you are a listener.
Mm-hmm. Agree.
I tell people that's like, in my mind, as an audiophile, that it is the thing that consumes us as a foreground active task, where other people can listen to music or melody or lyric and attenuate it out. It becomes the thing that will consume us.
But there are also certainly a lot of people who wouldn't consider themselves audiophiles that spend a lot of time listening to music.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think an interest in the equipment is also certainly part of the formula for like, are you an audiophile? for some people that's more just consumerism. Like I want to spend some money basically on some stuff and I want to use it for listening to music.
Hmm.
Then for some people it becomes more of like a hobby.
Hmm.
I mean, for me, like audiophilia means that like the not just the act of listening to music, but also like being thoughtful about what you're listening to the music on and having an interest in the equipment and how the equipment works and what it is that makes the music sound differently on, your system that hopefully you feel is a reflection of the way you want music to sound versus something else.
Hmm.
And just kind of starting to develop a deeper understanding of like preferences, if nothing else. Maybe like you have a stance on like, I like class AB amps, or I like tube amps, I like triode amps, I like, push
Hmm.
pull pentodes, whatever it is, or I have a stance on horn speakers versus box speakers, versus electrostatic speakers. Not that you have to have had a tremendous amount of experience with all those things, but you have a perspective on how you want to listen to music and on what. I think that one of the things that was a breakthrough moment for me was like when I felt like I was starting to have a sense of my hand in the system,
Hmm.
right?
Mhm.
Um, like I wasn't just hooking up some stuff and liking the way it sounded, but I was doing things that directly on a more of a component level, or was doing things that was having an effect on the sound and making decisions about what I wanted to do. That I start to feel like I'm a part of the music I'm listening
So
to.
it's kind of like the act of listening. You've now become an active participant in your listening, right? Like you're dedicating your time to getting it the way you want it by actively manipulating the components, building the components, and getting it to where you want. Does that make sense?
Totally, yeah. And also I feel like I'm interacting with the music in a way that
Mm-hmm.
like I wasn't when I just bought a few like box components and hooked them up and was like, I'm satisfied or I'm not satisfied to the way this sounds.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you become more of an active listener by taking action within like your system building. I mean, DIY is
Mm-hmm.
really important to me, for sure I'm more interested in people, experimenting and or just like crafting and participating in the creation of their equipment
Mm-hmm.
more than like just straightforward consumerism. Not everyone can do that,
Yeah.
not everyone has the um, mental space or time or whatever it takes to do that. But yeah, I mean, I find that like world of audio crafts people as like art makers
Mm-hmm.
just incredibly inspiring.
Yeah.
Um,
I, I appreciate the intention of it. Whether, so one of the things I had wanted to point out, I sort of used as an example of like two bookends to what I classify as sort of an audiophile in 2023 is the guy that bought the Sonos in-wall speaker systems. I think those are so brilliant. That you take the Sonos cubes now, you can embed them in the wall. They can rewire your wall, take a wall jack, and it's like it's a cutout for the wall, and it becomes so you can flush mount a Sonos speaker into the wall, right? Versus your gallery installation. Both of those show intentionality of
Yeah.
choice and wanting to make listening purposeful. And whether that's music selection, room treatment, um, equipment choice, EQ choice. I appreciate intention.
Mm.
You know, don't come at it accidentally. Accidents are like, let's see.
What?
Accidental or disinterested is less interesting to me than people, even if I don't agree with it. I just love to see someone concentrate on an idea that they feel important and execute against it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and take their best shot at it. I think is so important, you know.
Yeah. I also just genuinely love speakers and like audio equipment. I find it just like the most magical like creation. And so, you know, as long as the thing's not completely fake and or built on some farce of like marketing lingo and like made up technology, I'm into it. You know, like I wanna know about it. But yeah, there's nothing more disappointing than when you go into a store and you see a prop speaker. Um,
Well, actually, I'll tell you what I find really discouraging is when I look on Instagram and I see 3D renderings of things rather than actual photography of equipment.
oh my
Yeah, I'm a
God.
photographer, so I mean, I love
Really
the
good
photography.
3D, really good 3D renderings, but if you remember, like in software, they called it vaporware.
Yeah.
Oh my God, absolutely, man. I'm on a group text with a bunch of New York audio guys. I won't name names, but like a lot of the New York audio community, a lot of them are editors, reviewers, and stuff like that. And this one speaker that I've always found kind of like suspicious popped up on our like group text. And I think I was wrong about it, but I initially thought that it was someone that was trying to make a brand out of inspired by my use of the JBL contract control series that was making like a speaker on the 12-inch version of it. I think I was wrong. I think he actually is making a driver that just looks really similar, but it's incredibly confusing because I this thing popped up. I went on the website and I started looking at it. I'm like, what is this? I don't understand what this thing is. And I started looking at it and it's like this just slideshow of like the speaker in situation in all these different rooms and these really photorealistic renderings that I just started looking at them. And I'm like, there's something up with these pictures. I don't think these are real pictures.
I won't say the company. There's a company that's been doing that for years, where they absolutely gorgeous, like $2 million kinds of homes. You know, like 40-foot ceilings of glass.
They Photoshop or whatever.
They render the speakers into the room.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this company's doing that. It's a newish brand, so I don't think we're talking about the same thing. I'm only aware of this brand existing for the last 2 to 3 years, I think. But you're looking at the thing and there's just nothing real on the website.
Yeah.
And the thing that's really crazy to me about it is like, wouldn't it be easier to just put the speaker in the room and take a photo of it? Like, why go to the trouble of like, I mean, it's literally like me and this group of guys had to start like, I was like, guys, I don't think these are real photos. I think this is all just bullshit. This is all just renderings. And we had to like zoom in on like
you'll
the book
see
page
the edges
and start to see like, oh, the same book appears in 10 different places on the bookshelf because it's gotten that tricky. You know what I mean? And then you just get down to like, is this thing even I mean, I know the thing really existed because one of the guys was reviewing the speaker, so it is a real speaker, but it's just confusing to me. Then it starts to reek of marketing money, not like
actual passion for what you're doing.
Yeah, because in the process of creating a speaker, I mean, you've essentially generated like you have so much content to talk about. You shouldn't need to like fake it.
Yeah, I can see that. I appreciate that as well. Like,
hey Tyler, as time is limited, were there any questions that were popping up that were like user questions?
Jeremiah popped in for a second, and but there was no real questions.
Cool.
But there was Arthur Haywood came in, and he mentioned he actually has, it kind of goes on the longevity of kind of DIY. He has customs that are about 30 years old. He said from Zalatron, INDS. Cabase components in a Dapolito configuration with separate subwoofers with Vieta 12 inches in an isobaric configuration. So I thought it was kind of interesting that he has. I thought it was just cool that he has a system that it's like a custom system that he's had for 30 years, and it's just lived with them. That's so cool to me. Like that's just
sure. I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about like getting into timeless vintage whatever. There are certain speakers that like they just have a timeless quality to them, and I feel like when I'm building around something that the design is 60 years old, I know that I'm going to get something that I'm going to appreciate. Like once I get it right, I'm going to appreciate it for a really long time.
Exactly. Like that's beautiful, right? That's art in itself. That in and of itself, being able to configure and push it into those realms and be able to like build that. It's just a really beautiful thing. But yeah, I think there was I think most people were just watching, to be honest, having the conversation, enjoying. Yeah, if there's any...
So I have two questions, or a prop for both of us. So Devon, any projects that you can share or processes you can share for 2023? Enticements.
I'm working on a lot of stuff.
Gotta be more specific. Gotta show us something interesting to from you.
There's a big project that I can't talk about yet. It's a collaboration, and I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to present my work on a scale that I haven't done yet, being that like the work itself is of a slightly different scale, or just occupies kind of a space, maybe a gap in my kind of like offering, but also will be like more accessible to like a larger. They just have the company I'm collaborating with has like a wider reach than I do. So
that's cool.
That should be really,
it's exciting.
That should be really cool. And I have a bunch of ideas that I'm starting to explore for that project. In terms of the DIY thing, I'm working on something that I think will give people who want to get into like a deeper level of discovery and DIY an opportunity to do that. So I'm working on like a bigger cabinet than the one that the Art Bookshelf speaker is in. It's for a 15-inch driver. Maybe there will be also some adapters to run other size drivers, but it's going to basically be a multi-tune cabinet kit so that you'll be able to swap out the port and change the FB of the cabinet for several different box frequencies, box tuning frequencies, and then maybe some suggestions on which drivers will work well with which ports. But no crossover necessarily, no horn necessarily, no. The intention will be for like a 2- or 3-way speaker to be built around this box, but it's going to be a much more active participation that people will have to take. So
to tune it to where they want it, kind of thing.
Yeah, and it will give me an opportunity to offer more, more tools for those people and more educational things. But it'll also mean that people's outcomes will be drastically different. Cool. So we're also working with TAD now. We're working with TAD, and so like for example,
that's a big deal.
Yeah, so that's an exciting thing that we're starting to explore. We've got I just got a big shipment of TAD drivers, of the woofers and compression drivers. They've got
that's kind of holy grail.
Yeah. So, and also it's cool, very cool, because like I think the Altec based stuff that I've been doing for a really long time now, and TAD, there's like aside from the kind of legacy of Western Electric, Altec, JBL, the Japanese side of that is basically TAD, you know,
Hmm.
Pioneer TAD, doing the really high-end pro audio for DIY kind of stuff. So I just got a big shipment of TAD components, and so we're starting to figure out how we're gonna incorporate those into the big PA systems, but also like with this, for example, multi-tune DIY cabinet kit, it's like here's like is an Altec driver that works really well in it, vintage or new. TAD driver works well in it with the different tuning, and a couple other like more mass market pro audio drivers that work well for home audio use or pro audio use. Um, yeah, so like I think it'll just broaden and deepen the level of like DIY participation that people have.
That's cool.
I've gotten asked a lot about your turntable that was in your art installation. Is there any desire for you to either turn that into a kit or to begin selling
Yeah.
those?
Yeah, we just made so like the turntable is kind of the result of like a few years of experimenting with Techniques direct drive motors and using them more the way like our community traditionally uses like idler
Hmm.
transcription motors. The obvious Garrard 301, 401, Thorens, etc. And really like dissecting some of the Techniques turntables and using the drive units
Hmm.
outside of the confines of like the factory plinth, so it allows you
Hmm.
to run
Expand on
much
it.
more exotic tone arms, beautiful 12-inch new and vintage tone arms that people are really only running on like idler drive turntables.
That's cool.
I love idler drive turntables, but they also present a lot of challenges for very advanced, even DIYers.
Well, they're
Um,
also there's a finite supply, and if you can take a techniques and repurpose it, you now make it accessible potentially.
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I kind of wound up going in a slightly different direction than originally I started out. Like, it'd be great if people could like just like take a screw gun and like explode their Technics 1200 that they've had since college and build like an audiophile turntable around it. I wound up getting seduced into the new flat rotor Technics motors, like their new
Mhm.
direct drive technology, because they're really exceptional motors. And with in collaboration with LTA, linear tube audio,
Mhm.
I we developed a linear power supply for the that we're using with the Techniques motors. So we're using a few of the parts that I usually am getting as replacement parts or um, gutting out of complete turntables
Mhm.
and building like a really world-class turntable that you can run with, yeah, like any of these sort of fetishist tone arms from the SME
Yeah.
12-inch arms to the vintage Audiophile 12-inch arms, Dynavector arms. A lot of I've been collecting tone arms. I'm very passionate about tone arms, or some of the newer 12-inch tone arms by like the Groove Master, the Sorane arm. So
The
sort of
Groove
like
Master, he has a new arm that he's developed all his own now, correct?
yeah, I mean, I don't know of a new one, but the Groove Master 1, 2, and 3, it's like a banana shaped 12-inch. You can get 9, 10, or 12-inch arm.
Mhm.
But it's a beautiful arm. It's really, really fabulous arm. And I run those things on this Techniques direct drive based turntable. So yeah, to answer your question, I have quite a few customers that I'm building them for right now that are just like they want a complete system,
Mhm.
and I buy the parts as replacement parts, which is very expensive, I gotta say, and building them into original turntables for them.
Plinths and stuff.
But I've also kind of priced it out as like a kit. However, you need a 1200G to build it as we've got it set up right now. So if
Mhm.
you already own a 1200G or you source your own 1200G, we can sell you plinth and the power supply controller, that outboard unit that you see like in the gallery presentation. And and I haven't made instructions yet. I have a couple DIY customers that I'm gonna deliver to soon, and I don't know, making instructions is a huge undertaking. So often I'll just make a video and just like do it, and then it's like watch me do it and then copy. But yeah, I continue and may revisit the idea of making like a kit for older, more common techniques models that are cheaper.
That's cool.
The one, not that you probably already know this, but I have found that the Pioneer PLX 1000 is actually an exceptionally good middle ground table between the two.
I've not experimented with it. I've experimented with some of the standalone Denon direct drive motors. They're really good.
Similar vein, because when Techniques went out of doing the table, Pioneer and Denon both stepped in, made upgrades to the motor.
Yeah.
So it's not quite as nice as the Techniques, but it's also, you can get a Pioneer PLX, complete stem to stern for $700.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
So if you're having to, find a sacrificial lamb.
Yeah, I should check it out. But it's a lot of work to develop, like even just the plinth. Like in order to build that turntable, I make a bracket that the motor mounts to that then mounts into the plinth. And then the plinth is actually, compared to building like a Gerard, it's a very complicated cavity structure that we have to mill into the plinth, because there are 2 circuit boards that have to get like recessed up into the bottom of it, and they kind of have to fit like a glove in there and fit very close to the motor in order for the wires to all like reach between the power supply board, the regulator board, and the control board for the motor. The motor has got a very advanced control circuit, which we don't touch. That is just the motor, and that one PCB are like the Techniques parts that we need to make the turntable.
For sure.
That's cool. That's very cool. I don't know, is there any other questions at all, Justin, from you, or Devon? Do you have anything you want to kind of speak on before we kind of sign off and let everybody have their day back?
I think we covered a lot of ground, unless Justin knows anything specifically you wanted to discuss.
Well, my only excitement is that I donated a day and a half at my metal shop, and I brought them chocolate and spoke kindly to them, and they sent me drawings, and in 3 weeks I have metal coming.
Nice.
Got a new cool thing gonna happen?
Yes, I have the biggest hunk of pieces of metal coming my way in a long time.
You're kind of talking about it. You're going to Axpona?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to Florida. Going to Florida for the first time ever, and I'm going to Axpona for the first time ever.
Very cool.
Because I think that we've sort of expanded and developed in places that we feel really comfortable within the personal audio market. And I think that the places for continued development makes sense in the 2-channel market. And so it means bigger the one thing that I have been able to do is we've had a wonderful design partner with our transformer winder, and he continues to design really good transformers for us. And, I ask for special things and we get special things designed, and that's a beautiful partnership.
It's very cool.
And the metal shop outdid themselves, though. That's actually, here, I'll show you guys. So you see, Devon, that's 17.5 inches wide, and it's cut down the middle. So transformers on this side, tubes on this side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see that. Cool. That looks massive and great.
That's gonna be huge.
And it's all 10 gauge steel plate.
Nice.
Wow.
So
That's
it
big.
Might weigh just a little bit.
Tad heavy.
Yeah.
Devon, do you ever go to any of these shows at all or anything like that? I know you said not the RMAF and that kind of stuff, and that's been shut down, but
Not really. I do go to, it's like kind of an anti-show in a way. I go to the European Triode Fest.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's like a non-commercial like gathering
I can
sort
dig
of,
it.
and like purely like hobbyism for hobby's sake. At least that's what it's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like a really, really fun, fulfilling thing to like just spend several days like doing the thing in a really pure way.
That's cool.
I'm gonna go to. I was actually one of my first things was like the headphone comment. I'm gonna go. I think I'm gonna go to Can Jam
New York?
when it comes. Are you gonna do Can Jam, Justin?
So I have 2 amps at New York. Dan Clark Audio, which does a great planner headphone, and ZMF are both having one of our amps there. So
Yeah, stop by these people.
Yeah. So not ZMF. I misspoke. So AutoZ and Dan Clark Audio, but that's ZMF in purple, which will be beautiful.
I'm a big ZMF guy.
Well, you're super matchy with the sweatshirt too. I didn't even know.
I also love the color purple. I don't know if that was apparent.
I didn't notice that till now, but now it makes total sense. Yeah, so
I'm gonna go to Can Jam because it's like something that is like totally outside of my
like purview or like what your norm.
I'm gonna like start from the ground up and like develop a preference for headphones.
That's cool.
well, if I could just, I mean, because Tyler and I would actually be sort of, I don't know if Tyler's going to be there, but
I'm not going, no.
What I would say about headphones that I learned is, speakers always win for imaging, always.
Intimacy.
With rare exception, but headphones win for intimacy. And so if you really want intimacy, headphones win. And then the other place that headphones are so incredibly compelling for an audiophile is that you can get extraordinary levels of performance. Your dollar goes much further on the performance ladder.
Yeah, for like a top of the line headphone compared to a top of the line speaker is a massive gap. So,
but not just that. I mean, like the source components, the interplay between your source components, I think, is more significant. Things like that, there are differences. I think it will be a wonderful exercise for you to
it'd be interesting to hear what your thoughts are on that kind of thing. Dynamic versus planar versus closed back versus like just your experience would be pretty cool and unique. What do you think, Justin? Sorry, I interrupted you, Justin. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, completely. I mean, I that would actually be kind of the most fun thing. Like, did you come away from it like, are you a planner guy? Are you a dynamic driver guy? Do you like open backs?
Do you like wood and metal? Or
I know I like open backs. I've had a few pair of Grotto over the years, and I like them. But I mean, I have no preconceptions. I'm just gonna go and like listen to a lot of stuff and see what I think.
There's I don't think these guys will be there, but I think that's the other thing that's really cool in the headphone space, kind of like what you're doing, Devon, is there's a lot of DIY creators too that are like coming out. Like I actually have 2 sets here right now that have been sent to me to check out. And these guys they basically are 3D printing the enclosure and then putting their they source the driver, and it's called ETA.
What are those 2 brands called?
So this one's ETA. It's a little like a estimated time of arrival, kind of ETA. So that's ETA, and this one is Urztech, and this one's out of Slovenia. And he's more on the lines of like kind of like a ZMF, but he has this crazy on ear, and then I have the bigger ones, which are bigger over ear ones. And they're just, I mean, I don't know if I could probably get like it's just banded steel, and then he's got wood cups. These are the Thalia on ears, and they sound fantastic for what you get, and then like the higher end level of that DIY would be like the ZMF, which he does like the custom wood cups with like the more like, I love them because it's like artistic, right? Like they have that art factor to them where you can get different colors, and he's real passionate about his like
one of the nice things, or maybe I I wouldn't know. But if you go see Zach, you'll see what curation of wood or fetishization of wood. I mean, Zach
is a wood guy.
Zach
wood, metal, leather.
Well, he really understands those palette choices, and he knows wood species. And so being a speaker builder and then seeing like the texture possibilities, like, you know how you did the Don Julio with the different the different wood grain and the different horn, the palette choices were different. If you see like Zach's headphones and you see like the accent colors are different, the fabric choice behind the accent colors become different and are interchangeable, and the wood grain pattern.
One thing I really like on his site, he's DMF, right?
Yeah, DMF.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
One thing I really like here is that he's got like, and this is like really speaks to me, he's got like all these, very elaborately, intricately made headphones. They're, $2,000 to $4,000 it looks like. And then he's just got these Fostex T50RP for $160.
Yeah. That's how he started. Yeah.
I fucking love that, because it's just like, like I do the same thing. It's like, sure, like you could spend 6 figures building a system with me, and also I also sell this wire for $1 a foot, and it's great. You can order it here.
Yeah, that's exactly. That's how he got started, was the T50 RP mods. Is he would do custom wood cups on them, and mod the insides and stuff. So
Zach and Bevan are the principals of the company, and they're both super sweet, nice people.
Nicest people.
And they'll be there. You should come say hi to them.
Definitely go say hi and tell them Justin and Tyler say hi. I chat with them regularly. They're fantastic people.
Cool. All right, guys.
All right.
It was
Thank you
fantastic.
so much for joining us.
Yeah, this is super fun and educational as well, and I look forward to learning more and more. I read a bunch of all your articles that you link in your site, so it's really fun diving into that stuff and the Japanese audio and all that stuff for me. But
great, I'm glad people are doing that.
It's really good, and I linked everything below for anybody that is curious. I linked all of yours, Devon and Justin. All your web pages and social media is linked below for anybody curious to read more and research more and find out more. Go hit them up and follow them.
Awesome. Stay in touch.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot. I'll talk to you soon. Have a great night.
Have a good one.
Guys.
Have a good one. Cheers.
Bye.